Next, we will have our third update on the Shrewsbury High School athletic improvement field, for the field. I think what we'll do tonight, we're going to have the presentation by the project team, then the school committee will ask questions, then we will have those scheduled for public participation, make their comments, and then we will have our discussion prior to any vote. So I'll have the project team please come forward. And then if you could just introduce yourselves for anybody watching at home.
Sure. Start. Yeah, my name is Peter Spouse. I'm an engineer with Gale Associates, assisting with school owners.
Kathleen Coheen. Michelle Biscotti.
Angela Snell, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Jay Cossack, Director of Athletics.
Welcome.
Great, thank you very much. And we are back. So we are wanting to provide a little bit of a recap information, but more specifically address the questions that the committee had at your last meeting and provide all the information in response to that. And then at the end, field any questions you have. And then we are, again, going to make a recommendation that you vote to support this program. So just starting off here, again, always starting off with the vision for the future. And that there's a three-phase vision for the improvement of Shrewsbury High School athletic facilities. And what we are talking about tonight is simply and exclusively around phase one, which is the installation of a synthetic turf field at the stadium, and then also resurfacing of the track. And monies have already been appropriated for the majority of that work. And the synthetic turf field would be privately fundraised. Phase two down the road, if we get there in the future, would be a second synthetic turf field where the lacrosse field is right now, and then phase three would provide an outbuilding and storage facility for all of athletics, and then some additional seating. So again, we're talking just about phase one. We're going to talk a little bit about our goals, some of the conditions of the existing facilities, and a recent example of weather impact on our athletic program and our student athletes. We're going to go through your questions and our responses from your last meeting, talk about some of the reference checks, environmental and human health safety, which was primary concern, and then field any questions that you have. Just starting off with safety, again, synthetic turf fields, there's nothing new really in terms of the basic concepts. They've been around for about 4 decades. The products have certainly changed and improved over that time period, and there are literally thousands of these fields throughout our country. And there are certain agencies, state agencies, federal and state agencies that are in place to protect all of our safety as humans and also the environment. And so we rely upon those sources. Some of those are listed here that have determined that synthetic turf fields don't pose any elevated risk to the environment or student athletes. The goals remain the same. That the existing grass fields at the high school can't meet the current or future demand of playing time, that a synthetic artificial turf field expands that use, increases playing time, and that despite how well we might try to maintain a natural grass field here in New England, it's always going to be significantly impacted by weather and maintenance requirements. A turf field would certainly increase access for all of our playtime, and certainly right now we have limited access. Basically, the soccer team has limited access, and field hockey and lacrosse have no access. Of course, the football team plays on the field right now, and that certainly is part of the goals of this, that we do want to integrate some use of the field by our youth sports programs as well. And they currently have no access up at the high school stadium field right now. Our third goal, again, is player safety. And you'll see some pictures in a few minutes that, again, the conditions don't afford a consistent playing surface, and a synthetic turf field does offer that. That's one of the benefits, and increases and enhances safety. And then certainly in terms of the player safety, the artificial turf fields will be, in this case, will be tested for shock attenuation to make sure it is equal or greater than a natural grass field. It's referred to sometimes as GMAX testing. But again, player safety is of primary import, and we think that this project enhances player safety. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Costa to talk about just one example of the recent rain. And if you don't mind, just putting that mic a little bit closer so we can hear him.
Okay, just the recent example, Friday, October 21st, I had to make a decision on whether our boys soccer team was supposed to host Tantascwa on our regular stadium field, to which we already had other games up on the upper field. We were getting close to the deadline. We had a week until our deadline to get our games over with for playoff implications. About 1 o'clock, I had communicated with the Tantascwa athletic director, and they had recently installed their turf field, and I had asked him, would it make sense for us, rather than losing the day and play a ton of games the next week, for us to move over to there. We did. It was obviously a last-minute change, which caused chaos a little bit within school, trying to get the communication out. We ended up going to Tantascwa, so for our seniors, it was one less game opportunity to be able to play at home. However, we felt it was important to get the game in. We were willing to sacrifice that, and we went there to play the game, which added more expenses, for example, by having to add busing. We have done that in the past. That is just probably the most recent example that we've had to do that. Same with girls soccer. We had to make some decisions as far as games went. They were in contention to qualify, and the coach was concerned about the playing surface in the stadium. So therefore, we canceled some games and moved them up, and they had to play on a smaller JV field, which was per the coach's request because it was a better playing conditioned field. We also were working with AYF to try to get their playoff championship games up at the school. Mr. Ryan Soldo, the president, and I were working together, and with the rainstorms that we had, that major rainstorm on that Friday night, we had a decision to make, and unfortunately I had to tell him that he had to move his game because I was worried about them playing on the field for our future sports programs for this next week and the importance of our games. So it kind of put them in a struggle to search for a field at the last minute, and they had less than 24 hours to try to make that happen. And again, we were trying to be nice, but allow them up there, and we feel bad by adding the stress to them. And again, I talked about some of the fields. If you look at the current field conditions, this was taken about 2 weeks ago, I believe, or just after our last meeting. It's actually, since then, we've had to play a couple of soccer games in the rain. So you'll see the areas that are by the benches. That's actually the playing area of soccer, and those were pretty worn out to the point where on Monday when we hosted Algonquin in our playoff game, I was forced to look at our football JV schedule and try to scramble and get over to Oak so that we wouldn't ruin the field for that very important game. So that's one area. As you can see, this is standing at midfield, a lot of worn out spots, which typically happens over time with the grass, especially in football, as they're usually in that area. And here you'll see this is where the goalies stand, which is the end zone of the football field. Looking at the game on Monday night, you can tell our goalie had some situations with the feet, which made it difficult. So it's getting to the point where we just don't have the resources to keep up. Our Parks and Recreation do a fabulous job. Kevin Esposito and his crew, it's phenomenal. But the problem is with their manpower and being able to maintain all the fields and the demand for us to play our games, it just become way too tough.
Okay, at this point, we're going to transition to responding to the committee questions from your last meeting, and Mr. Spanos will take the first one.
Yeah, so the first one, just recapping some of the questions, as Pat said. The question about excessive heat for synthetic turf fields. That is typically one of the comments, one of the concerns. They do tend to run hotter than natural grass. However, most of it, or the majority of the heat, there's some generated from the fibers itself, but the majority tends to come from the PRUM rubber. What's being proposed here, the alternative infill, the EnviroFill product, tends to run 25% cooler than your conventional rubber infill product. We have also taken into account and designed in some quick connect locations to be able to deploy the water cannons to quickly cool it in a situation of if need be. And then also, doing your due diligence with what the weather forecasts are, and if being able to schedule games or practices around. If there's a heat wave coming, hold off until later on in the evening, hold some night games or early in the mornings. The next one was a concern of microband in the coating. The product, the alternative infill EnviroFill product, does come with a microband coating. It's infused in the acrylic coating of that sand. The majority of the product in the fields they distribute to have that microband in it. However, you can get it without it if you request it. They don't have an issue with supplying it without the microband. The microband, this version of it, the products that they've provided show that it's the same that's in consumer products, baby products, door handles, countertops, the industry standard microband technology. So the other question was the other schools that have incorporated this EnviroFill infill, have they done their own studies? And so the answer is no. They have not done their own studies. They've done, when looking at what product to use in their fields, they did their due diligence, just like the committee here is doing their due diligence, and compiled all the independent reports they could and reviewed those. The reports seem to indicate that there's no elevated risk. All the results are below the limits.
Okay, and at this point, I'm going to take over here and just talk a little bit about the potential revenue. That was another question or area that the school committee talked about. We presented this as a possible availability schedule for rental. And of course, these things in terms of the rental use of our field, we don't want to put the horse in front of the cart here, so that the details of how these types of programs would work out with respect to rental and rates would be decided later by the committee if this project were approved. But we've done some pro forma things for the committee to think about. And based upon this type of availability schedule, there would be approximately 900 to 1,100 hours of rental time each year. So what I did here, and you have this in your packets, is I took that information, I looked at some area rates, rental rates for turf fields, and typically communities have a dual rate system, one rate for their in-town or youth groups, and then a second higher rate for outside town or for-profit groups. And the ranges vary widely. I mean, you can see that here from no charge for youth groups to $125 per hour for youth groups. I called over to Four Kicks in Marlboro. Their outdoor turf field rental is $150 per hour, just for comparative purposes. So that's the in-town piece. The out-of-town piece, of course, is higher, and you can see some of those ranges: $120 per hour, $100 an hour. Auburn apparently at $250 per hour. And these are hourly rates for the use of the field. They don't include additional charges for lights. They don't include additional charges for monitors or maintenance folks. This is just a straight rental rate. So using the hours and using some rate information, I did a pro forma. This is just a model of what could be, and I tried to be conservative but realistic. So trying to, be somewhere in the middle, if you will. So I took we took 500 of the 900 to 1,100 hours if we were to rent just 500 of those hours. And if of those 500 hours, 90% of the time was rented by a youth group, which is probably a more likely scenario. And if we were charging $75 per hour, then the gross revenue on an annual basis would be $37.5. And if 10% of the time we're charged at $150 per hour, it's another $7,500. Total revenue, $45,000. And then building in this model that's currently in place with Parks and Recreation in terms of when Mrs. Snell rents out or schedules out our basketball courts for programs in the wintertime, she always hires a building monitor to protect our facility. And those rates are about $15 per hour. So I took that into account, thinking that we would have a monitor up there for all of these hours of rental. Total cost $7,500, so our net of $37.5. If we did that for 8 years, it would give us $300,000. If we did it for 12, $450,000. So again, this is a pro forma to get a sense of potentiality, and it will be contingent upon further school committee policy work around rental rates and availability. And it's important here to say that the goal of this rental program is, what are the goals? And this is something I know the committee will talk about because it's a philosophical piece around it. Is the goal to cover the entire cost of some replacement carpet in the future? Or is it simply to offset the cost? This is a privately fundraised project in which donors would be providing an asset to the community that could not otherwise be provided at this particular time. This asset has potential to generate revenue, unlike some other assets. Some other assets just depreciate. This one has a potential to generate some revenue. So those are all the kind of philosophical pieces I know that the committee will talk about, but I wanted to do some sort of pro forma to give you a sense of a range of annual net revenues to think about. Let's see. I think at this point, Angela, you want to?
One of the questions was, do we need special equipment to maintain the synthetic turf field? You do need a groomer, which would attach to like a tractor or one of our Toro infield machines. That's part of the contract, so we would have that. It's every so many hours we would have to go in and groom it, keep the infill, from being compact, and just make sure everything is safe. And then if we needed a deep cleaning or a deep grooming, then we could hire a contractor. There are contractors that come in and can do that once or twice a year for you.
So this is a couple other responses to the questions, concerns about the chemical exposure. We've provided multiple material safety data sheets to typical turf products that we've seen. The results from the laboratory testing and the consulting agencies have shown the product to be safe to the environment, not to have an elevated risk. Next one.
Yep, and I think I would probably just interject at this point with respect to the issue of microban, and I know that's been a point of further question and concern. This is not, I don't think anybody on the project team considers this a material aspect of this recommendation. This is something that certainly, if the committee were not comfortable with, that it's not necessary to have microban. This is an outdoor synthetic turf field that will be subject to UV lighting, rain, and other conditions that will naturally cleanse and take care of some of those agents. So the committee's not comfortable with that piece. I know that the project team this is not a material item to us.
So as Pat said, that's what this slide is about. It's about the microban. The microban that's been used. It's not the version that in the past would rub off. This is the one that's infused in the acrylic coating of the sand of the infill product, and you can have the infill without this product in. So the other question was, if you were to keep the status quo and keep this natural turf field, can you sustain it? And the short answer is no, based on your needs, how it's being used. If a typical natural grass field, you need to be able to rest it, aerate it, and then even as you maintain it, every so often, every 5 years or so, you have to resod it to the tune of close to $100,000. So the school's been around, 14 years? It hasn't been done yet. It's constraints. One of the reasons why it hasn't been done yet is you haven't had time to do it. You can't do it in July. It's not going to take. So the time to try to schedule around it, and then the financial implications to it as well. So the other question was life expectancy, the wear and tear, or is it just the component itself? So it's a little bit of both. The carpet is impacted, the turf itself is impacted by the amount of use. It's going to break down over time. Some of it's going to be from just UV exposure. It's a plastic product, and a lot of it is also the use. If the athletes are using it, they're displacing the infill, exposing more fibers. They need to be maintained, but as time goes on, it will start to break down. Currently, the industry standard is an 8-year warranty. There's some turf manufacturers you can write in the specs to try to get it to 10 years, but we haven't seen anybody more than that. However, with the new versions of the synthetic turf and the new UV inhibitors they put in it, the life expectancy is projected to be 10 to 14 years.
Okay, at our last meeting, you had raised the question of, say it takes us longer than a year to fundraise, if it takes us 2 years or more, would we have an issue with increased funds required for our project? And we've been assured by Gale Associates that the answer is no, that the turf industry is pretty stable and competitive, and their prices should remain pretty much the same. You had also asked, are we aware of any other districts or communities that have done projects like this, of this size, without having a large donor like Dunkin' Donuts did for Shepherd Hill, and we found 3 locally, and actually there's a 4th one, Marblehead. Wellesley had to raise about $900,000 from residents and from businesses. Westford had to raise money through their about $650,000 in private fundraising. Newburyport was a $3.4 million project. Marblehead, actually they publicly defeated a tax increase to have their fields paid for in 2010. It took them until 2013 to privately fundraise, and that was $1.3 million. And the other organizations primarily were a mix of like youth sport donations, private donations, businesses, and also the Community Preservation Act. One of your other questions was, what's the durability of an organically maintained field? We don't know of any municipalities that are managing their competitive fields this way. We know that, and we've heard that root zone is a root zone. There's no way to make a grass field be as usable 24/7 as a turf field can be. And also, will a new turf stadium field be accessible by multiple sports, boys and girls sports? And how will it be lined? We had a discussion over how it can be very confusing to have a lot of lines on at the same time. Say if your field is available to 4 different sports, how do you not make it confusing for the players? So what we were expecting was that boys and girls soccer would play on there, boys and girls lacrosse teams, the football teams, both youth and the high school, and field hockey. We would permanently stitch in the lines for football and soccer, and then use temporary paint for the other sports. And the temporary paint would wear off over time during use of that particular season, so that by the time you needed to paint for the next season or the next sport, you wouldn't have the previous lines anymore.
And as we've reported previously, we did reach out to other schools that are already using EnviroFill. We did focus specifically on those that have had it over multiple seasons, and in some cases in much warmer climates or temperatures than we would ever see here. And overwhelmingly, the comments we received were positive in terms of injuries. You know, they were seeing certainly fewer knee injuries, and no more injuries than they see on a grass field now. And again, they attribute this to really the flat, consistent surface that an artificial turf field provides. In terms of managing the heat, the next slide. Across the board, the schools felt that they were able to well manage it, that the product itself kept the temperature cooler than other turf products. And there was one school in particular that had crumb rubber and then went to EnviroFill when they redid their field. So, you know, they had certainly had that comparison to make. And then in terms of overall any health concerns since the field was installed, none of the schools had reported, you know, any concerns within their own administrations or within the community after the field was put into place. And then just some direct quotes from these schools. You know, the athletes like their field. It has a truer play, certainly for some sports, if not all. And then just injuries, you know, one school in particular said injuries in and of itself are a health concern for them. And they felt that, you know, playing on this surface, you know, drastically diminished or eliminated that concern. And that was a big plus for them.
Okay, I think what I'm going to do here is just close it up here in the next couple of slides and just make mention of a couple of things. One is really around two pieces. One is, you know, so-called due diligence, and the committee has asked us lots of questions, and we have tried to respond with corresponding information. There's somewhere around here a printed out school committee packet for this meeting. It might be around here somewhere. And we have done the environment an injustice because that school committee packet is over 500 pages. And so John has it. Okay.
Easy reading.
That's just tonight's. And you know that we've had 2 prior sessions and information. And so one of the things I want to just, and I'm not going to read them all, I do want to show them. So that the amount of information that we have provided. And secondly, I've listed all of these things out so that the community knows how much time the school committee has invested in looking at this issue beyond just these PowerPoint presentations. There's been an enormous amount of reading and research that you've had to do an evaluation on your own, and you've looked through all of these resources, and this is not just a function of 3 presentations. Those are 2 really important things that I want people to understand. So we've provided from information from various government agencies on synthetic turf fields. Most importantly, I think I'll just mention the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, Bureau of Environmental Health, the Environmental Toxicology Program. They provided a frequently asked questions briefing that's available on their website on artificial turf fields. And their conclusion was, along with the other state Mass DPHs listed here, that there's no elevated risk to the environment nor human beings. There's some other pieces there. I won't read through all those. But that's government agency information from those agencies whose purpose is to protect the environment and us. With respect to the EnviroFill product, again, this is a key component of our recommendation to the committee, was to not do synthetic crumb rubber, which is really the subject of most controversy with these fields, but rather choose this alternative infill product. And there's been lots of questions on that, and all of this information from independent laboratory results to material safety data sheets to the information on Microban, so on and so forth. Then there was questions about the Brock pad. Mr. Spano showed you that underneath the carpet, when you use the EnviroFill, you need to have a shock pad to make sure that the attenuation is safe for our players. And so you can see all of the independent laboratory results that have been provided on that material, and that it is a safe material for the environment. And I would reference there the Dudick Environmental Consultants Report. Again, that's the independent laboratory report that evaluated that there, along with the other information from Brock themselves. Regarding the turf carpet, again, we've supplied information on all those materials. We're not exactly sure which turf. You know, there's either something probably from the Field Turf Corporation or the Shaw, and so we provided multiple pieces here, information on turf carpet. And then finally, one of the points that was brought up in our last meeting, which is a very good point to bring out, is that there are current exposures with the current maintenance that we have right now. Through the Parks and Recreation Department, there has to be application of fertilizer onto that natural turf. And so we provided those material safety data sheets as well, because those are chemical compounds that are man-made, that are being applied, along with the paint that is applied to those fields as well. So you have that information as kind of balance points for the existing conditions. So I think I just wanted to take the time to mention that all of the information that you've been evaluating along is part of this process. So finally, the summary is that we're making this recommendation because the benefits that will afford not only our high school population but the larger community, that it would be funded through donor support for people that want to contribute to this, and that if they don't want to contribute to it, then they won't. And then finally, the due diligence has been conducted with respect to environmental and player safety. So that's our vision. We hope it's our future, and we have made a recommended motion for the committee to consider, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Dale, if you want to start.
First of all, thank you for getting this report together. Really appreciate all the information you provided for us. And I would say to Gale Associates, they should look at this report, and other districts may want this, because this is certainly important information, and certainly if it had been provided earlier, it would have been a lot easier for us to sift through. With regard to the 8 to 10 year guarantee, is that prorated in some way? In other words, if you have a claim on year 7, does it only give you 1/8 of the value of the mat, or is it a full replacement with no additional charge?
I don't believe it's prorated. No, it's warranted under any defects that it might have, whether it gets the lines come apart, whether the backing falls apart within that time. Correct.
Okay. So am I to understand that if it wears out before 8 years, but there's no, they're not going to say there's a defect in the construction, that would not pay?
Yeah. Well, there's recommended maintenance along with it. You can't be negligent and leave the goal areas displaced of infill, and then or have the football team practice in the same spot over and over and over again, and you tear out the backing, right? So the warranty covers things like if something would happen in the tufts, the fibers start coming loose, and you're getting excessive loss of fibers, things like that, or the backing starts falling apart, or the seams start unraveling. They would come in and they would either repair or seeing what's involved. I don't think we've seen a total carpet replacement that hasn't been warranted yet. Maybe 1 or 2 situations, but the majority of the time it's a seam coming apart or something like that, and you'd inform them, and they'd show up, and they'd make the repair as soon as the weather allowed.
Thank you.
Anything else? Is it John?
Yeah, Patrick, you answered the question from the last meeting regarding the revenue generation. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about in light of some of the feedback is, let's look 10 years from when this gets installed, and how are we going to pay for replacement? And I think you answered that over the 8 and 10 and 12-year period. And you might have included this in the thousands of pages over there, but average cost to replace a carpet after that 10 years?
I think I'd probably ask Peter about that. I mean, because this total project cost here, of course, is a lot of the work is the foundations and whatnot, or the underlayment, if you will. So is there some sense around just the carpet?
Yeah, so, and we briefly touched on it in the previous slide, that the prices for the turf have been very competitive, and they've stayed pretty stable the last 5-6 years. So I would venture to say you're putting down the infrastructure, you're putting down the shock pad. That's going to be in there for at least two life cycles, two turf life cycles. The drainage underneath and all that installed correctly is good. So the carpet itself, if you use the Envirofil product, they're claiming you can vacuum it out and reuse it and supplement it as needed. So you're only talking a turf field, let's say publicly bid out with infill, runs you around $4 square foot, $4.25, around there. So it would be the same. Granted, you're going to have some savings with being able to reuse the Envirofil.
Right.
So worst case for that field, typical rates now close to about $400,000.
Okay.
For the
So,
carpet.
yeah, we're in that ballpark as you laid that out. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Erin?
So related also to the Envirofil, could you talk about the impact testing, the GMAX rating, and why that's beneficial?
Yeah, well, that's again, that's the GMAX testing is industry standard. It simulates how much impact can be attenuated so that the athlete does not sustain injury. So the threshold of like a severe injury, let's say, is around 200. 165 is what they have as far as the limit goes. Typical in our specs, where close to 110 to 120, 130 throughout the life of the warranty in the carpet. However, those are a traditional sand and rubber without a pad type of system. The difference with having a shock attenuation or Brock pad is you can keep that level down to a pristine natural grass level, and they've found that the pristine natural grass, well-maintained field is around 95. So with the use of the Brock pad, they guarantee throughout the life of the Brock pad that it won't be elevated. It would be closer to around 95 range.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking when I did the research. I just wanted clarity on that. Yeah. And then I was curious, when you're all done using the Envirofil, you've used it for the second time and now it's done. I think you said last time that it can be recycled. Is that accurate?
The Envirofil product itself?
Yeah.
So you mean after you use it for the second time?
Right.
So now you're 24 years into it. It could be repurposed, I would imagine, yes. Yeah, unfortunately, it hasn't been around that long. So.
Okay. So it would be disposed of then through.
Yeah, but they would. You could find a way to repurpose it.
Oh, okay.
What I'm trying to say.
I see. Yep.
John?
Just a couple questions on the warranty related to that. Dale covered one part of it. There's service contracts for these. So warranty, it seems like it covers something extraordinary, seams, and the like. But what about where, I don't know, maintenance issues or anything like that that may not be under sort of the extraordinary? Are there extended warranty options? It sounds like we can negotiate it out to 10 years.
Yeah, depending on what vendor, I think you can negotiate it at 10 years. And the warranty, it's a third-party warranty.
Okay.
So in case that turf manufacturer goes out of business, you still are covered throughout that time. So if it's something that's an issue with like a seam issue or a stitching issue or some type of issue, that's what's covered.
Okay.
What do you mean by maintenance issue? If you mean it needs to get groomed or...
No, grooming we seem to have covered. I guess
Yeah.
maybe anything would be covered the first 8 years, I guess.
Yeah.
Just for
And-
where's
and
in
you'll-
5 years that
Yeah,
it's...
and you'll, if there's a major issue, if it's a defective product, you'll know sooner rather than later. I mean, you'll see something happening. You'll see excessive loss or the fiber is not working correctly. So you'll know that earlier on than like in year 8 or 9, if that's your point.
At the old high school at Oak, there were sinkholes and the field moved a lot. At the high school field now, do you have those issues?
Yes.
So how would that work? So we have this here, we have a lot of ledge up there. Are there any other concerns that would have by putting a field like this? The field has a lot of natural movement, so is it just grooming it is going to keep it smooth, or do we have any additional risk that with all the ledge up there?
Well,
you
you're
get
going to
frost
remove
heaves?
for this process. You're going to remove the topsoil,
Right.
And you're going to bring back free draining material as needed, and then the free draining stone on top of it, and you're going to laser grade it and compact it to the level it needs to be, so that you won't have it. It'll meet a compaction test. So the sinkholes. When you mean sinkholes, are you saying as a result of drainage issues or just soft areas that have been worn out over time?
Soft areas worn out on the hill area. I think we've seen a big reduction of those over the past few years. I mean, we recently had one on the stadium field over by the triple jump pit. I think with this project, there'd be a lot of regrading of that.
So it would be compacted, we think would be okay?
Yeah, it'd be compacted. It'd be laser graded to the right, so there won't be sometimes if natural wear and tear for natural grass fields, you'll get some undulations and some depressions that develop over time. And you got to keep up with maintaining them and keeping them. Otherwise, they will grow and be a bigger depression. You don't have that scenario under synthetic turf. The infrastructure is set.
Small questions. We saw, was it Lawrence, they had property damage on their field, and we're going to obviously limit the use. But from a property damage standpoint, if there is damage or vandalism for whatever reason, is that covered under our town policy, or how would that work?
So I did inquire about that. We would likely get a special rider. It's in the range of, I want to say it's about $300.
Okay.
But we would get some additional coverage specifically for the turf field.
And you usually get the insurance policy of the group using the field as well, so that you
Okay.
can charge it back to the group that uses it.
So it would be covered if a group used it, or if it happened at night, because obviously we can't put everything behind lock and key. So it would be covered in
So
the
that is a standard practice, that the third-party use provides their own insurance. You know, in the event of some sort of unknown vandals or something like that, we would rely upon our own.
One final question, unrelated to insurance and warranty and the like. The Mass Department of Public Health, in both the Needham and Concord letters, it sounded like they were, Concord was having, as well as Needham, they had some follow-up testing. Do you have any idea what they were doing at all? Whether or not they were following up environmental testing on the field and looking at a lot of the studies that we had, they'd be looking at exposure after X period of years to see what was going on, whether it was heat, whether there was any environmental discharge or anything like that. Do you know, by any chance, in Concord or Needham, what they've done in terms of follow-up testing and what they've asked the Mass Department of Public Health for help with?
I don't know specifically what they did in those two instances, so I couldn't speak to it specifically. I do know that generally, when those issues of specifically the water quality testing have come up, and maybe you can talk about the one study that you're undergoing, but what I've seen is it's related primarily to crumb rubber in potentiality of crumb rubber leaching into water sources. And again, that was one of the reasons we wanted to avert any possibility of that by choosing alternative infill. But I'm not specifically sure, and I know there's some study ongoing.
Like with Concord Carlisle, they put in some wells
Okay.
as far as because that's traditional crumb rubber field, and just to establish a baseline before the turf field got put in there with the crumb rubber, and then monitor it to see if there's anything elevated as far as the water that runoff from it.
Okay, thanks.
I just have a question around the fundraising piece at this point, and it might be too soon for this. When we're looking at fundraising, and maybe there's different tiers that you might be considering and what is involved in those tiers, because there will be some policy considerations that we'll have to think of with usage. Are you at a point where you can give us specific information about that, or is that coming soon? Where are you on that?
Sure. So,
We've talked about it
Yeah,
at
we-
length.
it's-
At length.
At length, yeah.
At
Well, I'm
length.
just gonna still-
Yeah,
We had
and
not made any final recommendations.
this is, I mean, I would call it kind of a classic chicken-egg dilemma in that, I think there's two broad avenues for donor support. One would be, what we would see as kind of the traditional commercial support, like we saw at Shepherd Hill. A commercial entity wants to advertise their business or create goodwill in the community, and so they donate a large amount of money in exchange for their corporate logo for a fixed period of time. That could be one arrangement here, and so that it has money for a fixed period of time, kind of like the Green Monster, at Fenway. That's the commercial model, and that may work. That may play a part in our fundraising efforts. There's another piece that is wholly different and, kind of speaks to the fabric of our community, what Dr. Sawyer talked about the other day, is we have some people in town who just want to improve our athletic facilities, to improve our community and help our student athletes. And they may want to give us a large sum of money, and in exchange for that, have some sense of perpetuity around their name attached to it. It's a wholly different model. And so we're trying to be considerate of both. And so, the chicken and egg part is if you just put out a menu and say, here's all your options, that's a pretty rigid schedule. And so I think what we want to do is be flexible and see how the community responds, both from individual investors who might want to memorialize somebody in perpetuity, and also from commercial entities who might want to simply create goodwill with their business. And so that's kind of a very general answer. I mean, they have done so much work on this, and we've created all these menus. And we have stuff, ready to talk to people about. But we do want to also have, we've got to raise the money.
Right.
We're talking about $1.8 million here. But we also want to be somewhat nimble.
If I could just add to that, of course, anything per your own policy, anything beyond $5,000 would be subject to the school committee's approval in terms of any sponsor or donation of that size. So the school committee has affirmative control over that. Beyond that, in terms of, and I think maybe you're alluding a bit also to the fact that there has been interest on the part of youth sports groups who may be interested in supporting the project financially. And there's a couple layers of that, because obviously right now, field use is governed through Parks and Recreation, not through the school department. So the field at Oak, for example, Angela Snell takes care of renting that if there's groups that are using it and that sort of thing. So we have some policy issues that we have to work through with those two town departments, which I'm confident we can do. But in terms of that approach, that's something we have to look at carefully in terms of access and governing access and those kinds of things, because that is one of the goals, obviously, would be to expand access to the community. Anytime you can take a community resource and expand access to the community, if it's a school resource, I know there was one question I think came to the committee about whether or not now, there was insinuation now there's sort of wide open use of the field and it was going to be shut down and locked up if it was, this project went through. I mean, the field already has a fence around it. There are times I think it is locked up. There, by I think tradition so far, since the high school's been there since 2002, typically the gate's open. People want to walk on the track, run around it, run on the field. When the high school's not using it, people have been free to do that. I don't anticipate that would be changing. But clearly, the official use may get more use. It makes me think of although the sport's not as popular anymore, I know that if you go to Dean Park and you see the sign for the tennis courts, if nobody's there, you're free to use it. But if someone's, not rented it out, but reserved it, right, they get dibs on utilizing it. And of course, as a school facility, the use of the high school athletic program or physical education program would have first priority. But that's why the schematic that was on the presentation relative to potential times where other groups could utilize it is part of the overall thought process around how this could benefit the community beyond just the school's needs.
Right, and I think it's because there's so many moving parts that we have to be mindful. It's not just infill, which is getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of moving parts that we got to make sure that we're staying on top of. I just have a question for you, Jay, and I am putting you on the spot a little about costs. When we've had these situations where you've had to move games, you've had busing costs. Do we have, I mean, if we go to their home field, then there's no cost. But I remember back sometimes during playoffs, we would have to actually rent turf. So there is a cost associated with the current lack of availability of our field. Do you have any rough estimate or maybe what you've spent?
Sure. I mean, a bus is an average of about $370 per trip. I know in the springtime, when we've tried to get our lacrosse teams out there early because we don't want to backlog the schedule, playing 4 or 5 games a week, we would rent out, for example, Assumption College. And Assumption College would probably charge us around $200 per game for the turf, and then it would include, you'd have to pay for a site supervisor. Then we'd also gain the cost that we currently had, which was the officials. So you're looking at per game, if we were to play, I'll use lacrosse as a good example, a varsity JV game would probably cost us about $700 to $800 to run.
Okay. And along, not just the usage, safety, we talk about player safety from an environmental, but also the surface itself. Can you speak to the surface we have now and issues to players versus turf, and also the difference of playing on traditional grass to turf, which is a faster. If you're not playing on that and you're in a sport, it is faster. Can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, the latter part, as far as look at the sports of field hockey and lacrosse, those sports are really designed for turf fields. Our field hockey program has done an amazing job on our grass. And again, Parks and Rec, we're one of the best grass fields around. However, you saw a big difference on the other night when we went to Neshoba and played on turf. It was just a different style. And I remember Coach talking to me the week before when we won, and we knew we were going to Neshoba. You got to get me on turf. We got to get used to it. And it's just a totally different game. When you look at the competition we're playing against, we're playing a lot of schools that are on turf fields. Now, postseason play are designed, and they're making us play on turf fields. So, to answer the question as far as the sports, as far as injuries go, I don't want to say our fields have created any type of injury, but there are some risks. I've had officials talk to me about the safety of how they feel like they're looking down to make sure they don't trip over something rather than watching the play. I had a local official actually last year do a Friday night football game, and our field was in tough conditions. Ended up tearing his MCL, which the next day he was actually chosen to represent Central Mass officials in the championship game. And he had to give that up because of his MCL. So I can't say, would we have, are students not going to get injured on the field? No, but I think there's going to be, there would be a reduction, ankles, knees, because it's a consistent surface, would help all the athletes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? We're all set. Dr. Sawyer, do you have any questions at this point?
No, I think I want to appreciate the information. It's voluminous information. I think I'll make a recommendation after we've had a chance to hear public comment.
Great, thank you. Thank you again for all your help.
Thank you.
Next, we have 5 individuals who have contacted the school committee in advance requesting to speak. So I'm just going to actually have them come up in the order that they contacted me. So first is, let me look at my list, Lily McManus and Matt Ward. Welcome.
Thank you for having us. First, just want to introduce ourselves. My name is Matt Ward. I'm a student ambassador for the class of 2017 at the high school. and captain of the hockey and lacrosse team there as well.
And I'm Lily McManus, and I'm the student ambassador for the class of 2018 at the high school. I play field hockey and lacrosse on the field at the high school.
So we just wanted to kind of speak on behalf of the student athletes at the high school. I mean, we are the ones who will be accessing the fields and stuff, and a lot of this presentation stuff has been coming from, you know, athletic directors and other people, and we just kind of want to get the student athletes' voice out there as well. You know, first off, something that really sticks out to me as a lacrosse player is, you know, every third Monday in March we have tryouts, and most of the time, or every single time I've tried out for the lacrosse team, we've been inside for the first like 2 to 3 weeks because, you know, we can't get outside due to the weather conditions and stuff like that. And, you know, we practice on a gym floor for an hour and a half, which is also short in time because all the other spring sports have to be in there on the same day. And we're almost at a disadvantage compared to other schools. I mean, I know a lot of the schools we play against are on turf and are outside for 2.5 hours practicing. You know, having efficient practices as well. I mean, we can't do all the drills we want to do inside. So I think we're at a disadvantage for that. And specifically, last year we played Wachusett in our first game. And we played at Wachusett, who has a turf field. And, you know, we had only been outside on the turf once up until that game, where they had been on the turf for 2 to 3 weeks practicing. And I believe it was a big disadvantage for us not being able to get used to that turf yet and not being able to do drills that we wanted to do during practice. And just sticking with Wachusett, actually, in the 3 years I've been playing lacrosse for the high school, I've only played them at the high school once, and I've played them at Wachusett 5 times. So we play them twice every year. That's one of our biggest rivals. And, you know, we give away all those home games just to get the games in because with the weather and everything. We give away a lot of our home games just to make sure that we're not playing 5 games a week later on in the season. And I just think it's a big competitive disadvantage for us as an athletic program. And Lily, I'm sure has stuff to touch on.
As athletes, we do understand how much the Shrewsbury Parks and Rec Department does for the high school. I know one of the best parts is when we have a home game and walking down towards the field, we get to see the freshly cut grass and the new lines, and it's very nice to go down there. But the big disadvantage during specifically the field hockey season is the huge dirt patch in front of the net. Because I know that with all the bumps in front of the net, the ball can get directed in different directions and can lead to accidental goals, which could have been prevented had the surface been flat. We also think that, colleges also like to see teams that come from turf and not from grass because they think that as on a grass field you're at a disadvantage. And, sorry, do you have anything else to
Yeah, just going off what you said about the little patch of dirt that she's talking about. I mean, the lacrosse field and field hockey field is the same field. And just from a personal level, playing on that field for 3 years, I play attack, which is you're around that crease area a lot of the time. And just it's not fun getting hit onto that dirt and rock patch versus being under another field where it's a lot more comfortable to fall onto that turf rather than a patch of dirt and rocks and stuff. And not even just lacrosse and field hockey. I've talked to multiple football players who were absolutely stoked that their game was at Assumption against St. John's rather than a grass field. They had played on that turf field earlier in the season, and they were like, oh, like we're so excited we get to play at Assumption again. I mean, the turf is so much nicer than the grass that they were going to play on at St. John's. And so it's just all the sports that would have access to those turf fields are really hoping that it gets approved because we really prefer those turf fields over grass. I know sometimes at away games it's almost not the worst thing in the world that I'm playing at an away game because it's on a turf field, and it's just it's a lot different. The game's a lot different, and it's a lot faster paced, which I think is really important that we get access to that during our practice time as well. So,
Great. Thank you very much. We
Yep,
appreciate
no
it.
problem.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Moss.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Thanks for having me tonight. First, I want to say everyone's done an excellent job presenting tonight. Wow, that's a lot of information. I'm coming to you as a concerned parent, lifelong Shrewsbury resident, former captain of the Shrewsbury High School varsity football team in 1990. So it's nice to hear we beat St. John's. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, we lost to them back then. But, you know, in playing football, I was on the Oak natural grass field 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. And that's, you know, we played in 8th grade back then, so it was 8th through senior year, so 5 years of that. So I've had some experience with the natural grass fields and playing on that. I wanted to reiterate from the last time that we're supportive of what the Turf Committee is attempting to do and to meet the district goals of improving the athletic fields and infrastructure, so we're supportive of that. What I do have here in my hand is, you know, a petition we had that is signed by 112 residents of Shrewsbury. That is, you know, supportive of making improvements. We're recognizing that there needs to be improvements. However, we're saying that artificial turf, regardless of the infill, is not as cost-effective nor as low maintenance as it's marketed to be. Poses serious health and environmental concerns and is not the preferred playing surface for the majority of athletes. A safer and lower cost alternative is organically managed natural grass fields. It's asking, please do not approve the installation of artificial turf fields at the Shrewsbury High School. So just to go over a couple of things, we've heard a lot about extended use. So I just wanted to read something from the Gale Associates report funded by the boosters, the Shrewsbury High School Athletic Campus Evaluation and Feasibility Study that was out in June of 2015. There's a quote from it. The resultant feasibility study is intended to determine the viability of redeveloping and reconfiguring the existing athletic field areas to include a new synthetic turf game field at the stadium facility. So that was the original objective right out of the gate. So we're kind of saying, where is the option of natural grass and getting some of this deeper information that's being presented for synthetic, also for natural grass. Also in this report, Gale Associates goes on to say, though everyone agrees that a natural turf field in pristine condition is the best and safest playing surface, goes on to say, synthetic turf, however, is preferable to an under-maintained or frozen natural turf field. Again, let me reiterate what the Gale Associates report did say. Though everyone agrees that a natural turf field in pristine condition is the best and safest playing surface, synthetic turf, however, is preferable to an under-maintained or frozen natural turf field. The report goes on to say that the stadium field is in fair to poor condition. Maybe, just to add in there, maybe due to the 14 years without the attention it needed to maintain it, to keep it in that more well-maintained, pristine condition. In the last meeting, we heard that there was less than 100 uses on the field because of that. But a well-maintained natural grass field can hold 250 to 300 uses. So that's almost a 2.5 to 3 time increase in extending the use. So that's a huge increase if we look at investing in natural grass. The use that goes beyond that, up to probably 700 uses. We'd like to say, can we take a step back and take a look at this in more detail? Because I think there's, you know, a lot of questions around this and specifics that we need, maybe given a baseline of hours of usage by each team. Right now there's football and soccer. Maybe we take a look at what is expected by that, and then a baseline of what's used, and then also if we're going to add lacrosse and field hockey on there, what would that take it to? Would it take it from 100 to 200, and would that fit within the extended use? And is the extended use really going to lead us into this, rental process? So, that gets into the fiscal responsibility, where we need to be fiscally responsible. We should plan on that 8-year warranty, right? If we're going to be using it more, I know Mr. Sammy brought up a good point last time, the more we use it to pay for the replacement, the more we're going to wear it down. So maybe the higher the cost is going to be. So I think that was a good example, 500 hours of use, which at 2.5 hours a use is 200 uses. So that's saying that we might plan to do 200 uses. So if we're at 100 uses now, plus 200, that's 300 uses. I'm sure there's more to it, but I mean, that's why I'm trying to say I think there's more to look at in here. And given that the public's going to would want to see this, because that eventual responsibility is going to go to the taxpayer. So maybe, has the finance committee of the town been, had a take on this to say, is this something that we're going to have to, because we've seen other towns out there struggling to replace their fields with these rental fees. Then you get into, we've heard from other towns that there's issues with the youth sports league. So they're kind of promised a lot, like, help us fund this, we're for this. And in the end, they're found, well, sorry, we can't get, the cost is gonna be a little bit higher for you, or we really gotta replace this field, so you were going to go for the tournament this Saturday and not, the youth sport league. So there has been some talk in other towns that we've talked to that here they have funding, and having funds taken away from their, snack shack or registration fees, that's going to end up going to replacing fields and not towards the sport itself. So we're kind of going to be hooked into this endless loop of paying and repaying for these artificial turf fields. So the other thing is chemicals. So we talked about chemicals, a lot of material safety data sheets. We're proposing organic management, which University of Lowell Toxic Use Reduction Institute, hence in its name, Toxic Use Reduction, is the true innovation. True innovation is to look at something and say, do we want to increase the toxic exposure or decrease it? So we're planning to take out that equation of balancing, fertilizers and pesticides. We want to go organic. And that is a lower cost as of the report, cost analysis report by the Turi Institute. So we're actually proposing a lower cost, safer option, healthier option for the kids. Might not get as much extended use. We know there's a kind of cap there between 250 and 300, but how much are we in the rental business as we are into, giving time to our athletes? The turf field's going to be over our aquifer, so it just happens to be that the high school and the athletic fields are over near enough to the town's drinking water wells to put them in the Shrewsbury's Aquifer Protection Overlay District. So shouldn't we be concerned for our town's drinking water if we're going to have all this material there over years and years and years? Some of the examples of that, antimicrobials, disinfectants, biocides, fungicides, herbicides, flame retardants, plasticizers, UV stabilizers, anti-static treatments, solvents, paints, paint removers, even recommended biodegradable weed killers such as Roundup, which the World Health Organization is now saying is a probable human carcinogen. So we're going to be spraying all this stuff. We're going to have things there for 16 years, the microban coated sand. So, even though it's encapsulated in the acrylic coating, what about the respirable dust that's coming off of that, over years? And, that's going to be coming off and people are going to be breathing that in. That itself is probably the most salient concern, is this microban, which relate to endocrine disruption and bioaccumulation. And we talked about maybe not using that, but we went from, are we going to maybe use crumb rubber based on the budget we were given, gone to EnviroFill with microban, maybe we won't use microban, but if 99% use microban, why are they using it? What if we don't use it? What risk do we have? Do we have more risk of MRSA, which is a big thing that's listed under also Turi Institute's concerns? So we're going to increase our MRSA risk by not having microbans. So why are they coating the sand? Silica sand is a level 1 carcinogen from respirable dust. Are we coating it to? So some of these questions, I'm just trying to raise these to say these are a lot of questions raised that maybe we should be bringing back, getting more information on, so that we can, make a decision, because this decision is going to be with us for a long time to come. Maybe we need our Board of Health to weigh in on it as well. Maybe the Board of Health will say we don't want all this once we review the material safety data sheet. So I just thinking, we're supportive of improvements. We think there's a better option, lower cost, safer option that we haven't looked into enough. We hope that you will take our feedback into consideration and look at that option before you make a decision on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Next, Catherine Wishwani has to speak.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Rajwani. I grew up in Shrewsbury, played town soccer, and attended Shrewsbury schools, as did my parents. I left to attend college in New York City and then lived and worked in a number of states, including California, Pennsylvania, and Texas. After having children of my own, I persuaded my husband to move to Shrewsbury. I wanted to return in large part because I had not seen and could not imagine a better place to raise my own children. I came back for the schools, community, and my family. We could not be happier with our choice. Each teacher our children have had at Spring Street School has been exceptional. The school administration consistently exceeds our expectations. My husband coaches our son's soccer team. We enjoy volunteering at Spring Street, and in general feel lucky to be part of this community. My friends in nearby towns tell me how fortunate we are to live in Shrewsbury, and I couldn't agree more. The thoughtful decision-making that this committee and our superintendent engage in on a daily basis should be, and I believe is, sincerely appreciated by all of us. I come here today not as an adversary, but as a thankful beneficiary of all that you do for my family. Despite this sincere gratitude, I cannot sit idly by without participating in the public process and providing my feedback on the town's athletic campus improvement plans project. I believe it would be irresponsible for the members of the school committee to approve phase 1 of the improvement plan, about which many significant details remain unknown and many valid concerns have been raised. Before casting your vote, I hope the committee members will take a hard look at the potential long-term health and environmental consequences. In a rush to push this plan through, several myths appear to be informing the conversation. Myth 1, artificial turf fields without crumb rubber infill are safe. It is shocking that anyone in this day and age could deny the inherent negatives associated with plastic fields. This is the replacement of cooling, oxygen-producing, carbon dioxide absorbing grass and dirt with a foot of rock overlaid with synthetic fiber made from petrochemicals and treated with flame retardants and lead, which is then routinely maintained with chemical antimicrobials, static conditioners, solvents, fungicides, and Roundup. And those are just the ones we are aware of. According to David Heath in an article published by Vice News and the Center for Public Integrity, while there are more than 80,000 chemicals available for commercial use, the EPA over the past 30 years has assessed the health risks of only 570. It doesn't matter how many studies the artificial turf industry underwrites or how many white coats they hire. We've got to be smarter than this. Myth 2, our children need pristine playing fields. While I appreciate the appeal of perfectly groomed fields, that is neither a realistic nor appropriate goal for our community. The all-or-nothing attitude that our stadium field either remains in a state of dangerous neglect or is replaced by a multi-million-dollar installation that rivals the best golf courses does not allow for a happy medium where our field is upgraded and maintained for safety. This is real life, where perfect bounces don't exist and perfection isn't a virtue. Learning to cope with manageable obstacles cultivates psychological resilience, which allows children to rebound from adversity as strengthened and more resourceful individuals. As Shrewsbury's athletic success attests, our children's strength lies not in their school facilities, but in their determination, athleticism, coaching, and resilience. Myth 3, without artificial turf, Shrewsbury athletics will suffer. Fortunately, the current debate has brought the important issue of field maintenance to the forefront. Everyone knows the high school needs a new stadium field and upgraded facilities, quickly. But there are lots of ways to solve these challenges without driving away would-be athletes with the use of plastic fields. We need to take a good look at all the resources we have: community involvement, generous donors, landscapers experienced in green methods, town monies, a horticultural vocational program, and build a sustainable plan from there. It's time to stop drinking the artificial turf Kool-Aid. Perhaps we should follow the wise examples of Concord and Littleton and other towns that are passing 3-year moratoriums on the installation of artificial turf fields. And in the meantime, let's put our heads and wallets together to make this project something of which the entire community can be truly proud. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Anthony Tizano has asked to speak.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I'm the current president of Shrewsbury High School Athletic Boosters Association and a former vice president and coach of Pop Warner football for 11 plus years. I'm also the parent of 3 student athlete alumni who have now made me a proud grandfather and current and future Shrewsbury High School student athletes. A portion of the Shrewsbury Athletic Boosters Association mission statement is to encourage enthusiastic support and interest in Shrewsbury High School and middle school athletics, to contribute to the advancement and needs of the athletic program in those schools, and to lend support to the Director of Athletics. Boosters has supported the athletic director by funding the original study of all sports fields and facilities done by Gale Associates, and will continue to support the athletic director and program throughout this fundraising venture. The addition of a turf field will contribute to the advancement and needs of the athletic program by allowing more playing time and income revenue. It will also allow youth programs to experience what high school sports can be in their future. That experience will encourage them to continue on in high school sports and also promote school spirit, which sports helps create. As a former vice president and coach of youth sports, I have personally witnessed the impact limited field space and overuse has had on this town and sports. The loss of the Oak football field during the school renovation caused teams to play games at the Coolidge School for a whole season on a field not designed or set up for that sport. In later years, the creation of 2 football associations forced one to practice and play games at Coolidge and use it as their home field. These situations and the inability to use the high school field caused financial strains on these associations by having to purchase temporary goalposts, the loss of entry gate and concession sales, and the ability to host jamboree and playoff games, which are only available in a rotating cycle every few years. These losses directly affect the ability of these associations to purchase needed equipment and fund the association that solely survives on registrations and fundraising. While I am no longer affiliated with youth sports, I am currently a spectator for youth soccer and soon to be well for baseball and football. As Boosters supports Shrewsbury High athletics, it also supports youth sports in asking the school committee to vote yes to allow fundraising of the turf field, because the youth of today are the future athletes of Shrewsbury High School. Thank you.
Thank you.